Damaged Defenders by Sherza. Chapter 125. Darcy and Christine Everhart. To say the press exploded once the meet and greet portion of the press conference was done was to massively understate the case. For that matter, Darcy was pretty sure she'd spotted more than one person on the verge of or succumbing to an actual facts temper tantrum, especially during Pepper's part of the whole thing. Now, Darcy was pretty sure they could hear the howling clear in whichever realm was furthest from Earth. For a good 2 minutes, it was just a solid wall of noise. Darcy wanted to be Pepper when she grew up, because Pepper, who stepped up to open the floor to questions, just stood there, calm as you please, a serene half-smile on her face, like she didn't have the ravening hordes, otherwise known as the press, baying in front of her. And within 2 minutes, the press subsided. Tony's getting the press to sit at their butts on the floor with just a few words and a negligent wave after his return from Afghanistan had her entire poli-sci class in a swivet. Darcy herself had cackled about it for a good 5 minutes while not so secretly being in awe because, damn! Talk about power and influence. And this was even better because without a word or motion from Pepper, the press shut up and calmed the hell down. This was power, at least here on Earth. Darcy knew a lot of people would strongly disagree with how Thor had introduced Tony that first trip to Asgard, because Tony Stark was not literal royalty. He wasn't a Windsor or any of the other actual facts royal families, and yet, in the grand scheme of things, he had as much or more power than the majority of them put together. To put it bluntly, having heard how the Kingmakers worked, Darcy would not be at all surprised to discover a Stark would wield Earths someday. Hell, it wouldn't shock her to see Tony himself wield it. Or Pepper! At any rate, everyone, shut up! And Pepper pointed at someone in the crowd to ask their question. Predictably, it was a doozy. By what right do private individuals act so unilaterally, claiming it to be in the name of Earth? Snapped one of the reporters, who'd been having a conniption the entire time. Darcy was pretty sure he was from Fox News, but wasn't entirely certain because he wasn't one of Fox's usual talking heads. Pepper cocked an eyebrow. Darcy tried not to snort, grin, gaggle, or otherwise allow her amusement to show. Beside her, Hank made a nearly subvocal noise of amused anticipation. Darcy may not have known Pepper for long, but even she knew that particular expression presaged a verbal butt-kicking. Hank clearly knew it as well. Name me one time every nation on the planet agreed about anything, Pepper said. Then name me one time every nation on the planet agreed on a course of action within a year's time. Dead silence. Of course, such a thing had never happened. Oh, a good-sized chunk of nations had agreed on things and acted in concert more than once. Within a year's time span, too. Hello there, world wars and a few massive natural catastrophes. But every nation working towards the same goal within a year? Nope. The Titan, because an actual name of sorts, no one had used Thanos, though, had been mentioned finally a few times, though Pepper hadn't used one during her initial explanation, is coming. He has an army whose conservative count numbers in the hundreds of millions and could very easily count in the billions. He wants to wipe out all life on not only Earth, but the rest of Yggdrasil's realms in one fell swoop. We either fight or we die. Since myself, Tony Stark, and the other various peoples who have stepped forward are interested in living and disinterested in political power plays or other shenanigans in the face of extinction, and are willing and able to move swiftly, we have begun what the governments of Earth are currently incapable of doing, Pepper said. Which, ouch. Talk about throwing down a gauntlet. Darcy had no idea if Pepper was deliberately doing that or not. Hell, for that matter, Darcy, for all her experience, was in political shenaniganery, didn't know if the gauntlet, deliberate or not, would be perceived and acted on by all the world's leaders. Certainly a lot of them would have a knee-jerk and then later a more deliberate and thought-through response to basically being called idiots and capable of acting for the common good of all. But whether all of them would pick up on that, Darcy didn't know. Pepper was being pretty blatant, but people could also be pretty dang blind. Or the message could get lost in translation.
Will Stark Industries return to producing weapons?
Came the next question. Darcy flinched, because even from the side and somewhat behind Pepper, where Darcy could barely see her expression, that glare burned. That poor idiot might just be literally bleeding out right now, because, ouch. Yes, because destroying large swaths of Earth is the answer to fighting off this threat. Pepper snapped her tone so scathing and sarcastic and loaded with, "Are you stupid?" Then half the reporters in the room flinched back from her in reflex. And she had a point. There were enough guns and ammo around the world to serve their purposes, probably, and it would certainly be possible to churn out more. And Darcy wouldn't put it past Stark to start producing those on the quiet. But the absolutely last thing they needed was to be producing a ton of bombs of any description. There were way too many out there to begin with where this fight was concerned. Granted, a single bomb did a lot more damage than any one gun, and they had their place in warfare, Darcy supposed. What better way to destroy an enemy's weapons plant or big military base without bleeding your own nation dry in the process, for instance? But this scenario? Yeah, bad idea. Severely bad. Bombs were indiscriminate weapons. You aimed them at a place and hoped they hit where you aimed them, for starters. They didn't always hit where they were supposed to, for a variety of reasons. When they hit, they destroyed everything in a certain area around where they were hit, governed by how powerful the bomb was, whether it was their intended target or not. The Chitauri were going to be literally everywhere. That many bombs going off in that many places would ultimately do more damage to planet Earth than the Chitauri would. Especially if some absolute moron panicked and greenlit using nuclear bombs. Hence, mutants. While there were mutants who could do every bit as much damage or more as a bomb, they were people. Which meant they could think, reason, strategize, and alter their aim on a split second's notice, which would drastically reduce the damage done to the planet and drastically increase the damage done to the Chitauri and Thanos. Someone finally asked a science-related question, and Pepper turned it over to Darcy. Darcy took a deep breath as she approached the microphone and did her level best not to quail in the face of such bloodthirsty attention. Having Thor and Loki behind her helped immensely, especially Loki. Don't get her wrong, Thor was a badass and could and would make a smear of anyone that gave her grief, but... well, Loki was more his style, really. The pain of a physical beatdown went away eventually. The kind of pain Loki could inflict with a few well-chosen words that could stay with a person the rest of their lives. Christine was willing to admit that she, like virtually everyone on the planet, had fallen hook, line, and sinker for Tony Stark's public persona. She completely believed he was a drunk, womanizing, irresponsible, over-charming asshole. She also knew she hadn't been the only one to want to take him down a peg. Or 5. She'd found the evidence of under-the-table weapons dealing long before she'd approached Stark. She'd been bright enough, at least, to make sure she had irrefutable proof of her claims. Her original plan had been to blackmail the asshole, which, retrospectively, hadn't been the brightest idea she'd ever had. But in her defense, she hadn't known then what she knew now. Blackmailing asshole Tony Stark, if that's who he really had been, would have been possible and probably very easy. In reality, well... Christine had been courting her very incredibly painful and public destruction at Stark's hands, and she hadn't had a clue. Of course, everything had changed really fast once she'd confronted him with the evidence. That had not been the reaction of someone who knew they were doing something illegal and had been caught red-handed. And then to top it off, Christine had gotten something she was damn sure no other journalist or pap or anyone in the news industry had gotten. To wit, She'd gotten a split-second glimpse of the real Tony Stark, the abrupt switch from devil-may-care playboy to stunned, pissed off, abruptly dead, serious, and vengeful merchant of death. God help her, because in that moment she'd realized how true that fascistly given moniker was. Had nearly given her whiplash. Even then, she thought that would be the end of it, more or less. That he'd maybe send out a memo or fire a few people, but otherwise call it a day. What he'd actually gone and done had... Well, you could have knocked her over with a feather. She hadn't believed a bit of his public persona since. What cracked her up was that virtually everyone else still did. They saw him in that armor he'd built going to war with terrorists and assholes in general and still dismissed him as Playboy Tony Stark. Christine had no idea how the hell he pulled that off. But he did. And now here he was, upping the ante. Again! Granted, he wasn't here in person, but this had his fingerprints all over it. From the tone of most of the questions that got asked, it was clear that about half her fellow reporters were thinking this was another patented Tony Stark stunt, which, to be fair to them, it was. Just not the way they thought. Christine didn't pretend to know Stark well enough to know what was really going on behind the curtain, so to speak, but she knew this wasn't a case of the irresponsible playboy doing what he wanted. She'd started taking extensive, detailed notes the moment she'd arrived. She noticed, how could she not with their faces all over the news, most of the folks who defended Manhattan scattered around the room out of uniform. Hilariously, a few of her less observant fellows hadn't realized who they were rubbing elbows with. The thing was, the more notes she took, the more she got a glimpse of what was being set up, what was going on behind the scenes. And it was stunning in its scope. If her notes were right, there were teams of mutants prepping to defend the planet on every continent, save Australia and Antarctica. And from what was being said, they were hoping to get a team set up in Australia soon. The rest spoke to a surprisingly well thought out, given they'd had only a month and a bit to come up with it, plan to defend the planet. And the science contingent hadn't been idle either. Apparently, Banner had begun trying to find some chemical or biologic agent to bring the Chitauri down that wouldn't backfire on humankind. SI's R&D people were hard at work finding out as much as they could about the Chitauri tech from the corpses and machinery that had been salvaged after the battle. In short, Stark and his allies had this as handled as it could be from what she could see. There were a few gaps in the general plan, but they were the result of simply not knowing all the variables, not a result of incompetence or inattention. And Christine absolutely would not put it past Stark to have a number of contingency plans to deal with those gaps. They just weren't being mentioned today because this was a very pointed, shit is going to go down, but we got this message today. Combined with an, I dare you to do better though. That was never actually stated, but was very incredibly heavily implied. Why had she ever thought antagonizing Stark was a good idea again? Alright, he was really frighteningly good at the whole man behind the curtain shtick. Christine sat back for most of the conference and let her fellows froth at the mouth and try to find whatever sensationalist angle they wanted to this mess. Then, when things were starting to wind down, Christine raised her hand to be recognized. She grinned up at Pepper when she was called on. She'd learned her lesson a year or so ago. There was a heck of a lot more to Tony Stark and to Pepper Potts than anyone knew, even her. But she discovered that they were both ruthless and relentless in the destruction of their enemies. She planned to make it clear she wasn't on that side of the line. So, correct me if I'm wrong, she said, her tone slightly catty on purpose to lead her fellows astray as to her intentions. But it almost looks to me like Stark Industries has managed to forge alliances both political and otherwise, has begun creating or commissioning technology, recruiting personnel, and has developed a workable plan of defense for Earth against an extraterrestrial threat in a month's time. And yet, that's what had been being said over the last few hours. But not in so few words, or so bluntly. Christine could see it catching a few of her fellows right in the solar plexus. Pepper, for her part, gave Christine a benevolent, beneficent smile that somehow still managed to be up to its eyeballs in intimidation and a few other things that made the hair on the back of Christine's neck stand straight out. Exactly, Pepper said. The conference shut down a few minutes later, mostly because the news hounds were almost unanimously stunned silent. It wouldn't last, Christine knew, and the news over the next days, weeks, and months would be interesting, to say the least. But for the first time, some of her fellows were beginning to realize just how much they'd underestimated and or dismissed Tony Stark, Pepper Potts, and Stark Industries. It was going to be a hoot watching them try to make sense of this new aspect and trying to put it in its proper place in their notions of who and what Stark, Potts, and SI were. The mental gymnastics they'd have to go through to make it fit boggled Christine's mind, but she had little doubt that was the way it would go for most. Only a rare few would come at that triad with a clean slate, rather than trying to fit this into their pre-existing notions.